This is the Prusa Mark III S Plus with the MMU2S multi-material upgrade installed. The MMU3 is out. Do you need to upgrade to it? Hello everyone, Chris here. I am not going to deny the fact that when the Prusa MMU2 multi-material unit first came out, it was very challenging to get consistent results with it. Now you can achieve those, and they have made some upgrades to it over the years, but everything has to be set up just right. From your filament holders all the way to the sensors, everything has to be lined up just so to get those consistent results. I use my MMU2 units all the time, pretty successfully, but now there is an upgrade to the MMU3. But it's around $90 to get the kit to take your MMU2 to that MMU3. Do you actually need that upgrade kit? And here's where I'm going to say nothing that I do today is supported by Prusa research. This is just things that I've done to make my MMU2 better, and a lot of them have been upgraded on the MMU3. Also, I do think it's a good idea for you to buy the MMU3 upgrade kit. Again, it's a little bit of money, but you're going to get a lot of metal parts that are going to make your MMU2 more consistent, or MMU3, that I can't get you today. I'm just going to focus on the printed parts that you could print out yourself that are going to help you achieve better results. So we're going to walk through all the things that I would do to get your MMU2 up to an MMU3 status without having to spend a lot of extra money. And we're going to start with the firmware. It has been completely rewritten. There's a lot of good stuff in here. I just want to walk through that because there was a lot of effort made on the firmware side to make this whole project way more consistent. For starters, there are a couple of great Prusa blog entries on all of this and what they've done with the firmware and the development for the MMU3 for the Mark III printers and the Mark IV. I will leave a link to these in the description. The one that I would take a look at in particular is when they introduced the MMU3 and all the upgrades they've made. They've completely reworked how this unit and the firmware, along with the slicer, interact with the filament, so it gives you more consistent results. But when upgrading the firmware on the MMU2 with the new MMU3 version, what we're most concerned about is the feedback that it can provide. The different boards that are in play here, the one for the main board for the printer and the MMU2, can now talk to one another. So they know exactly what's going on all the time and can provide feedback as well as take care of the problem itself. There's a lot of actions that it can now take automatically so you don't have to. For instance, here you can see on the screen, it's trying to give you an idea of what happened, why the printer didn't do what it should have, and give you a link to some information so you can try to troubleshoot that. If there's something that I learned from this document, it's this line right here. And I have used it. I've done a lot of tweaking and hacking with this feature. It fully enables two-way communication, and that just makes all the difference in the world. So talking about firmware is a little boring, but just go ahead and update both your printer and your MMU2, which is what we're going to do now. Head to the Prusa 3D site, go to Help, find the MMU3, and we're going to get 3.13.2 that runs on the Mark III, and 3.0.1 for the MMU3. We'll just extract that zip file. Here are the firmware hex files that we need, and we can just install those with Prusa Slicer. I'm cabled up to my main board on my Mark III. We'll just go to Flash Printer Firmware. It knows we have a Mark III. We'll navigate to our new firmware file. This is the one for the Mark III right here. We'll hit Open and Flash. Your screen's going to give you some information about your firmware upgrade process. Once your upgrade is complete on the printer, you might get a message on the screen talking about how your MMU firmware needs to be updated, but we're going to tackle that next. Change your USB cable over to your MMU2 unit, rescan. We'll go back to Browse. We're already in that folder. We just pick the MMU3 hex, hit Open, and Flash. After hitting the reset button, the printer will reboot one more time. You can see we're on 3.13.2. You'll hear the MMU2 start up. After the startup is complete, we no longer have any errors. You can go all the way down to support, see what firmwares you have. There's 13.2. MMU connected. 3.0.1. Now you have all that goodness for the MMU3 already baked in to your existing MMU2. And that's all there is to upgrading the firmware. And I can't stress this enough, out of everything that I'm going to show you today, this is the most important part. They've really done a lot of work on this firmware. Before, it was like the MMU2 couldn't even get out of its own way. It couldn't even make decisions on how to correct problems that it saw. That is no longer an issue. So if you do anything at all, this firmware upgrade for your MMU2 is going to work right out of the box, and you're going to get all of that benefit. Now let's move on to some of the hardware pieces that can be upgraded really easily with just a few 3D printed parts. So we're going to go through all these upgrades bang for the buck at a time. So the ones that I think are going to give you the most benefit. Again, I've already said it, can't say it enough. Firmware is going to give you the most benefit. But then we're going to move to the extruder housing. Now, this is what you would have on your MMU2S, or something like it. You've got the chimney, as we call it, with the filament sensor here, your Bowden intake as it feeds it down into the hot end. And adjusting it could be just a little bit tricky. There's a screw here in the back. You can loosen it up and slide this thing left and right to adjust the sensitivity of this filament sensor triggering. That was one of the biggest downfalls to this. You had to get this chimney just right, or it wasn't going to be able to get the correct feedback from this sensor to go ahead and feed it on in. Well, they've completely reworked this chimney part, and all you have to do is replace this chimney. Nothing inside here. But I would recommend swapping out your PTFE tube while you're doing all of this. Inside here, there's a piece of PTFE that feeds your V6, and it looks something like this. It's chamfered on both sides, on this end and this end. These wear out, and they are crucial to getting a good shaped tip on your filament so that it can retract and inject it easily. It doesn't take a whole lot of filament changes, in the thousands, to start seeing some wear on one of these. So if you're going to take this apart, go ahead and swap this out. They're a very specific length, and you do need these chamfers. You can order them from Prusa. I believe you get some if you order the upgrade kit, but you can also make them yourself. So check that out. It's not a have to, but I highly recommend it. But from here, just print out your new chimney parts. I'll leave a link to the parts in the description, but they're all available on the Prusa site. But we'll just take off our coupler. We'll take up the top cover here where the filament sensor lives. Be careful removing the sensor. You don't want to get fingerprints on it. Just unplug it from the cable. And then this screw back here is what adjusts it and holds it on the top of the extruder carriage. That will separate, and then you can get your wire out, and there's your two pieces. And we can just swap in the new MMU3 piece. So the only real issue here is this is the new MMU3 piece. You'll notice it just has a hole in it, and we've got a brass insert on the MMU2 piece. Now, if you're very careful, you know what you're doing, you can heat this up, pull that insert, and swap it over to your MMU3. Again, not supported by Prusa, not recommended, but I have done it. If you're careful, it works out okay. So you will have to do that to be able to use this new hat. So if you're comfortable with that, you might be ruining your old MMU2 part to go to MMU3, but it's probably going to be worth it if it's successful. So you'll have to swap this over to this part. And when you're done, it'll look like this. And here's a look at all the new parts that are going to go back on that are MMU3. We saw the base, but the chimney's different as well. And what makes it such a good upgrade is the new chimney slides on the new base, so it's much easier to adjust. We just have that one screw that goes all the way through to tighten it down after you've adjusted it. But then we have this M3x30 that goes all the way through so that you can do fine increments of adjustment. On the bottom of the chimney, there's this M3 square nut that longer screw goes into, so you can make these really fine adjustments and get it dialed in just right, and then it stays put. So a lot of benefit there. So we'll take our new base and we'll set it on. Mind your filament sensor wire, and it's going to run underneath your new chimney, kind of like it did on the old part. We'll thread it through that bottom channel and then up and over, like so. And again, this whole thing just slides on top. Then we can install our M3x30. Remember, it goes into a square nut in our new chimney. Just thread that in for now. And then in the top of the new base, there's actually a little slot for an M3 washer. That just keeps that adjustment screw from backing out. So we'll slide that in. And then you still have the hole in the middle of the washer for the wrench to make the adjustment. And then on top, to hold it onto the extruder body and to finalize your adjustment, you have an M3x18mm screw. Now, I do recommend putting an M3 washer on that screw before you put it on, just to give it a little bit more real estate after you make your adjustments here on top of the printed part. So it just goes in that same hole that the old mount did. And we'll just leave that a little snug for now. We'll put our filament sensor back on, plug it in, and then put our cover back on. And then you're ready to adjust it. With that top screw loosened up a bit, I'll just show you how this works. But you can run that screw down to bring this chimney to the left, and then back it out to send it over to the right. If you back it out, that makes the filament sensor more sensitive. If you push it in, turn it to the right, it makes it less sensitive. But when you find that sweet spot, then you can snug up this screw on top and it won't go anywhere. A much better process to get this filament sensor adjusted. There's a whole sequence on Prusa's website. They show you how to calibrate that sensor. I'm not going to go into it in depth, but you can get the sensor reading just like you could before. It's not triggered. And then you can adjust this screw. It's at the least sensitive right now. We'll back it out just to give you an idea of when it does get triggered. So we hit 1. Back it out a bit. We'll go back to 0. And then you can test it with a wrench or a piece of filament, however they recommend at Prusa, to dial it in. But it's much easier to do, small increments at a time. So again, a large improvement here. So the filament sensor chimney is definitely a modification that you want to check out. It's just a lot easier to use and dial in. Now, filament management is something that I usually talk about with the MMU2 because it's very important. I've done pretty much a whole video on it years ago, but a lot of us that are using the MMU2 probably already have our own solution to making sure the filament is right. Now with the MMU3, they did rework the filament buffer and make it load with cassettes. It's much easier to use than the original one, but it does require a lot of metal parts, bearings, shafts that you get with the upgrade kit. So I'm not going to go into that today because hopefully a lot of folks have already solved for that. Now we're going to move on to a few printed parts on the MMU2 itself that's going to make your life a little easier. Now there are several changes on the MMU3, all these different kinds of parts that they've changed up to make it a lot easier to use and more consistent. A lot of them require metal parts, however, like the selector has been reworked, but there's a magnet in there that holds the ball down so that it doesn't necessarily trigger falsely. Now I can't do that because you'd have to buy that magnet, but there are a few things that we can do that are just printed parts. And a lot of the things that they changed come directly from the community. On the blog post for the MMU3, they have listed all the modifications that they have taken inspiration from and where you can get them. It's good to see that they've listened, they've seen what we're doing with the MMU2, and they've built it into the MMU3. One of the best upgrades seems very simple. I've showed this in a video before, but it's the pass-through adapter on the back of the MMU2. This just allows you to disconnect the PTFE tubes that feed the MMU2 so you can correct any problems. I have this on all of mine, but now it is baked into the MMU3. But definitely take a look at this list. It's going to give you some hints of what the MMU3 has before you consider upgrading or buying a new one. Also remember too, all the printed parts are available for the MMU3. I'm just showing you the easy to do modifications, but if you were to reprint some of these other parts, like the base here for example, you could use that new PTFE pass-through part that they have on their site. So you could upgrade a lot of things just by reprinting all of these. Again, I'm just showing you the really convenient ones. And this next one we're going to go over might sound really easy, a simple thing, but the cover that covers the board for the MMU2 got swapped out. And you wouldn't believe how much easier it makes your life. So I'm just going to take these two screws loose and remove the board and its case. One here, one here. You don't even have to release any of the wires. You can just take these three screws that hold the board on the plastic part, take those loose, lift out the board, and we can swap in the new part right here. This part is a lot thinner, but it helps to reduce noise on the MMU3, and it has these covers to keep the screws for the door adjustment from falling out. Let's put it on and then I'll show you how it works. We just flip it back over, put our board back in, we can use those M3 nuts from the old cover, put the M3 by 6mm screws back on the board to attach it to the new cover, and once the board's on, it goes right back on the MMU2 with those same screws. And it might look a little foolish, but this really does save you from looking for these screws and springs for the door adjustment. But with this on, you have these caps. So if you need to open that door for any reason, you can just loosen up the screws here. Remember, these screws, they have the spring loaded on them. And then you can just fold it open. And that cover keeps those screws from falling out. A huge upgrade, a very simple part. And then when you're done working on it, just screw those back down. I like to keep them flush with the top of this old cover. The new cover actually has some alignment spots on it where you can kind of get them even so you can see the screw a little easier. But again, you could reprint that door if you really felt like it. But just a really easy, quick part to improve quality of life. And I have another one that's almost exactly the same type of upgrade, and that's these hangers right here. The new and improved version actually lets you stand the MMU2 unit up on the frame so that it's easier to work on. So we'll just take these loose. There's just two screws on each. There's one side. Both are off. And the new holders are identical. You just need two of them. Same screws, one here, and the other goes on this side. And we can set the whole unit back on the frame. But now when it's in use, it's not near as tight as the old version is. And when you need to do something with it, it has a slot. You can stand it up like this. Another just really nice to have feature, if you need to open this door, see what's going on, when you're done, put it right back down, and you're good to go. Again, super easy, but it makes it a lot more convenient. So with just a couple of printed parts, you can add a lot of these features to your MMU2 that the MMU3 now has, and they've kept the body and a lot of the larger parts somewhat similar, so you don't even have to swap those out. If you were to do that, you could probably get even more benefit. Some of those other parts will fit the newer body and door, but check that out for yourself. Now, this next one, don't do this. This is not something that's supported by Prusa at all, but it is one thing that they have corrected on the MMU2 with the MMU3 that you can kind of hack your way into. And I'm going to show you how, but let's go ahead and put a big warning at the bottom of the screen right now. Now, if you were flipping through the manual on how to upgrade your MMU2 to an MMU3, you probably came across this, the PD board part preparation. This board right here fits on your MMU2 board in these two slots for power and data. One of the issues I've run into is with the data cable on the MMU2 not being able to provide enough current, and that can throw an error. Usually it's some sort of TMC driver error. This board that they give you helps prevent that, and it works really well. But if you don't buy the upgrade kit, you're not going to have this board. And a lot of the issues that you see are concerning the 5-volt line, this blue wire right here. This side plugs into your main board pins, this side plugs into your MMU2, and the voltage on that can dip a bit. It can be from a number of things. Sometimes this pin is just a little bit loose. If you go through and reseat these, that can solve the problem. You need just a little bit more voltage or current than you have. And just a bit of a refresher on how the power coming into the MMU2 board works. You have these lines right here that bring in 24 volt to power up the board, the drivers, the motors, all that good stuff. Then you have these communication pins over here that I just showed you. You have 5 volt in, ground, transmit and receive, and a reset pin. So this is the 5 volt logic side of the board. This is where you start to see issues with the voltage drop, not getting enough current, and then you throw some errors. But there is kind of a hacky way to get around this. The PD board has fixed it once and for all, but we could alter this a bit to get us in just a little bit better situation. If you take a look at the MMU schematic, we have inputs over here on P1, what I just talked about. Transmit, receive, ground, 5 volt. And you can see the 5 volt runs through these different resistors just to condition it so it comes into the board. If we scroll up a bit, we have this header called P7. This is the I2C SPI header that we don't use on the MMU2 board, but 5 volt does exist there. Now they show it is 6 pins on the board, but there's actually only 5 of them there. There's only a 5-pin shroud. And if we're very careful here, we can poke around a little bit with our multimeter. We don't want to blow anything up. Don't do this unless you're really confident. But if you check the voltage down here on this header, positive here, ground over on this side, this is going to give you a good representation of the voltage coming into the board from the current header that we're using, that P1. So 4.6. Remember, we're currently plugged in to where the stock location is. This blue wire is 5 volt coming from the board. Now, if we were to use this 5 volt pin over here on the P7 header, all that stuff you saw in the schematic, the thing that matters is we're bypassing that diode. It's the reverse polarity diode. If you are really careful, as again, this is just a hack, you could send the 5 volt power over to that pin. So if you were super careful, you could take out that 5 volt wire outside of this connector, use it to connect your transmit and receive in the normal location, and then use that first pin in P7, that one right there, as the power input. And if we were to test again on this same header, now we're in that new pin on P7, now we're getting the full 5 volts. And again, I've seen these errors where you get driver errors. I don't remember the exact number, but if it gets hung up, sometimes just randomly, it can't get enough current, and it will throw a TMC error. This could give you just a little extra oomph, a little extra voltage to keep that from happening so consistently. Again, if you do the upgrade, this has been taken care of with that breakout board, but if you want to hack it and give it a try, you could go this route. Now, please don't plug a bare pin in here like I have. Get a shroud, at least a single pin, or better yet, get the full 5 volt shroud, so at least you have the clip. You can get these shrouds from places like DigiKey. They are around. I'll try to find the part number for you. But if you're going to remove it from that one, at least put it back in another shroud. Now it's nice and secure in there. It's not going to short out on anything. And then you can just slide it into P7 and use it that way. So there it is, a handful of upgrades you could do to your MMU2 today to make it a little closer to an MMU3. Let's call it an MMU 2.2. And a lot of these are just printed parts that can make your life a little easier. They're convenience mods. But the biggest upgrade is definitely that firmware. You should be running that anyway, and you're going to get all the features the minute you load it for free. Now, upping the current/voltage on the back of the board to get around certain errors, you probably don't even need to do that. And you're probably asking yourself, why do I tell you not to do things and then show you how? I said you could do it. I didn't say you should. But if you are having that error, there is a way to hack your way into it like I showed you. Remember, if you purchase the upgrade kit for that 90 bucks, all this goes away. You get all the metal parts, including all the parts for the new buffer that is much easier to use, all that good stuff. So definitely look into that set if that's something you want to do to go all the way to the MMU3. So, hopefully you found this helpful. That is it for today, and I'll see you really soon on the next one. Remember, Prusa doesn't support anything that I just did here. See you later.